Hi, in this video in C# with applications for web development, we're going to add a feature to a program that we've already made. So in a previous tutorial, we created this application that shows a bunch of products. The new feature that we're going to use is this button here, and right now it's labeled as Demo Modal. A modal is a screen that pops up in front of the web page without an entire reload. So you can see that we have a box where we can change the dates or change the prices. So let's say we're going to change this from iced tea just to the word tea, and let's raise the price to, let's say, $84, and we'll leave everything else the same. Now what's supposed to happen is that this box here is going to refresh. You can see also in the console there are some messages showing up about the data that we're dealing with here. Watch what happens when I choose save. We get a new refreshed box here, and the tea peach now is the word. You can see some of the contents that were logged off into the console tell us what's going on in the background. And so the point of this tutorial is to teach you how to do a partial page update on this catalog of products. And we're going to go through all the steps so that you learn how to do the JavaScript, how to do the partial page updates, and the proper controllers and the actions that go with that. So a lot of details here, but to make a more sophisticated web page and a better experience for your users is coming right up. So I've just regressed the program back to the point where we were at the previous tutorial. So if you haven't looked at how to build this application, go back and check out the playlist to see where we are. So at this current stage, the application can do updates, but not the partial updates that we need. So let's go through the steps that we're going to need. First of all, I'm going into the views area, and into the product folder, I'm going to make a new view and make a partial view. And this will be just enough code so that we can display one card. So since I'm interested in one card, I'm going to name the new view as underscore product card. And so I use the underscore character to indicate that this is a partial view. And then for the template, we're going to use the details, and the model is the product model. Now when we're done here, we will have a details view with a model listed on line 1. So the only interesting part of this is line 1. The rest of this doesn't relate to anything that we want, so I'm going to delete all of the code and leave it like we have here. I could have typed this in manually if I understood what I was looking for, but I always rely on generated code by the computer to avoid syntax errors. Now what I want this to look like is to have one card on the screen rather than a table as what I just deleted. So I have a card that is defined in the index already. So let's look at the index page to see which part of this page is the card. And so you can see starting down in the section where we have a div, we have the class of card here. And so I think this is what we're interested in. Now there's a part that won't work, but most of it will work. The part that won't work is the item.name, because item comes from the for loop that is up here on line 6. So we're going to just change item to say the word model, and it should work out okay. So let's cut this out, and we're going to put it into the partial view. So paste it in there. Now as I mentioned, we're going to see some errors. You can see that now we have the thing called first word it doesn't recognize. Everything that has the word item in it is no longer recognizable, so we have to fix that. So since line 1 defines what the model is, and we can see there that a model is exactly one product instead of a list of products, we're going to go through the code then, and wherever we see the word item, we replace it with model. So item used to be one item in the list of the model. Now the model itself is just one item. So we get the same results for one card if we replace all the items with models. Now we have another problem here. First word was a calculated value, and I didn't copy the code that we need to make that. So let's go back into index and see if we can copy that. So we have 2 lines of code that were used to create the first word. And so let's just cut those out as well. And let's go back to our product and we'll paste it in. So let's make this into C# code. Right now it's being interpreted as HTML. So to make this C# code, I'm going to put an @ symbol and the curly brackets, and then move these 2 lines into that region. And so now those items are interpreted as variables in C# code. So we can see the same problem occurs here, that item needs to be defined as model. And let's see if anything else is fixed. So we have first word being defined, and now the first word doesn't have an error in it below. So it appears that we've got everything fixed up. So what we did then is we chopped out all of the information inside the for loop and we replaced it with a partial view. Well, now we have to replace the partial view. So let's go into here and type in the word partial and inside a bracket. And then we have to define what the name of the partial is that we're going to replace. So the name is product card. And then what is the model that we're going to send to it? Well, the model is going to be the word item. So item came from the for loop. So the for loop still in its existence. We're going to send the model as this variable item. When we get to this page on the partial view, the product card, the variable item then becomes defined as the model. So all of this code here and the syntax looks good. The page now looks simpler, and it will also have the benefit that we can eventually replace a card using a partial page update. So I just want to make sure that I haven't messed anything up. We haven't changed any of the logic really. We've just moved one piece of the code to a partial page. Let's run this and see if it works. The application is up and running, so let's go ahead and choose something. I'm going to try search products, and let's put in something like soup and see what comes up. We should see that the page still works like it did before, even though we've got a partial page. So it looks to me like we're getting some results and there's nothing broken. So far so good. Let's move on to the next part. Now the next part is I want to get some code from Bootstrap. So I go to the official Bootstrap website, which is getbootstrap.com, and I'm going to go to the docs and see what we can find here. Now in this version of C# and ASP.NET that I'm using, Bootstrap 4.0 is what's being used. And so I'm going to switch here from Bootstrap 5, which is the current latest, and I'm going to switch back to 4.5. So if you're from the future, maybe C# is working with version 5 of Bootstrap by now, but at this point of when I'm making the video, Bootstrap 4 is what I need. So now I want to go to the components area, and I'm looking for a modal. So let's see what a modal is, and then we'll probably just copy and paste from it. So first of all, a modal will look like this. It's like a dialog box, except it is part of the page. It is hidden and shown using JavaScript. So here's an example. We're going to copy this code here, and we'll see what it looks like first. So let's click the blue button, and you can see the modal is produced here, and we've got some text, and then we have a save and a close. That sounds exactly like what I want to do with our code. So I'm going to choose close. Now the two pieces that we need is, first of all, we need a button, which will correspond to this blue button here. Then the second part is this code, which is the modal itself, the dialog box. And so let's copy here, and we'll bring it back into our code. Now the modal can go right here on the index page. So right at the bottom here, I'm just going to paste in the modal as it is. I'm going to make one modification right now, and then we'll test it out. So the name of the modal here is example modal. I think we can probably come up with something a little more creative than that. And so what I want to do is call it edit modal. The edit is the purpose of what we're doing here. We're trying to edit one of the objects. So edit modal is what I want. Let's save that. Now I'm going to switch back and copy the other point, which is the button trigger. So let's copy here and then switch back again. And think about where we want this to appear, the button. The button will appear in the card. And so we'll switch over to where the cards are. And down here we have three buttons in our card right now, which is show details, edit, and delete. So you can put it anywhere in the order you like. I'm just going to put it at the end. And so now after the delete button, we should have a new one. We do have to tell the target to be updated because I changed the name of the modal. So you can see the target is example modal, and I changed mine to edit modal. So we've got that to agree with now. Now if you want to, instead of choosing this for your text, you can change it to somewhere else. I'm going to say modal edit maybe is a good name for it. You can choose whatever you like. Let's run this and see what responses we get. All right, the application's running, so I'm going to open up some products here and let's see what we can find. So when we see a new button now, it says modal, and it looks like I didn't spell it very well, but it says something like edit. I've got here Soup Z. Let's see what happens when I open that. So it does show modal title and then 3 dots and then the 2 buttons. So not much content yet, but at least we can see that the modal is working. So if yours doesn't work, if nothing appears, then go check to make sure that your version of Bootstrap that you copied is the correct version. So I noticed in a previous attempt when I made this that nothing happened at all. I looked in the console, there were no log errors, and so it just turned out that Bootstrap version 5 was not compatible with the current version of C# and ASP.NET that I was running. So I had to go back to version 4.5. Anyway, you should see something that looks like a pop-up window. Let's take time to fix one problem here. So it says modal edit with an L. I'm going to just change that to modal edit. And also in the index, I have a partial page, and I'm going to put a div around it. This div around the actual partial page will give us a unique identifier, so later on when we try to replace it with JavaScript, we'll have something to call it. We'll have a unique number. So I'm going to call it card number hyphen, don't forget the hyphen, and then put in the item.id. So for each card on the screen, there will be a div that marks it as card number 1, card number 2, card number 3, and since they are unique values, they will be accessible by their ID value. So that won't be used for a little bit, but that will be very important when it comes to replacing and doing a partial page update. Next, let's return to the modal itself. So in the index page, we have modal, and we have these 3 dots, which aren't very helpful. This is where the contents of the modal goes. So let's put some space in there so we know that we need to include something. Now, what do we want to include in there? Well, we should have an edit form. Well, we have a text edit for each item in the object. So there's an ID, name, price, and description. Well, if you followed a previous tutorial, we already created an edit form where we can change the values of these guys. It's just not in the form of a modal. So we're going to borrow some code that was made in a previous tutorial. If I look over here and I see show edit form as one of my items, let's go and see what's in there. So this is the edit form. You can see its job is to display a product model, and then there are inputs. So we have an input for the ID, we have an input for the name, an input for the price, and the description. So those inputs are really what we need in our modal. So I'm only going to copy the section where all these divs are and the inputs appear. So this is a good starting point for what we need. So let's copy here and bring it back into our index page. So the section where the modal contents goes is where I'm pasting. So this is not quite what we want, but it's close. So you should see that there will be some text that pops up that says we've got a problem. And so the problem is that when you create an edit form using the template, it automatically associates these items with the model. And the model is different on the edit form than it is on the modal. The modal really doesn't have any model to go with. So where it's got the word ASP4 in it and it says ID, it's going to complain that says there is no definition for ID. I don't know what variable name that is. So we can fix that just by taking out the ASP and leaving it as what's more generic and what you would see in HTML code is 4. So find all the items where it says ASP dot or -4 and just change it to 4. The other error that occurs is the items where we do validation. So we're not going to even try to do validation on this form right now. So let's just take out all of these lines that have the places where we would see error messages. Now I'm going to want to reference these items in the JavaScript code, and the simplest way is to provide each of them with its own unique ID value. So I'm going to name each of the input fields as modal -input and then what it's for. So ID and then modal input for price and name and for description. Another item that I'm going to update is the save button at the bottom of the screen where it says save changes. Let's give this an ID number, and that way we can use it in our JavaScript as well. So let's call this thing save button, and we'll use that obviously when we want to save. Now also look here at two different classes. So you notice the close button has a class called data dismiss modal, and its purpose is to close the modal box when this button is clicked. So right now if you click close, well, the modal disappears. If you click save, it stays on the screen. And so I want both of them to behave as a close option. So I'm going to copy and paste this new tag here. And so we've got ourselves the same data dismiss as the close button does. One other form of housekeeping that I want to do is I want to add a actual ID to the button itself. So back in the card partial view, we've got the button. It needs a value. So the value is going to be the number of the product that we're representing. So let's go and use the @model here. And is there an ID? There is. So let's choose ID as my choice. So the value of the button will be important when we start clicking it. Now I want to be able to get one product in the JSON format. So let's go to the controller and look at the actions. So I have an action right now called show one product. I'm going to copy and paste that one because it's almost exactly what I'm trying to do next. What I want to do next is show one product, but return it in a different format. So rather than returning a view with a web page in HTML code, I'm going to return it in the format of JSON. So I'll just name it that so it sounds reasonable. Now I have to change the type of data that is returned. So I'm going to, instead saying return view, I'm going to return JSON. So JSON text is what's coming next. And whatever I put inside there will be returned in a JSON formatted format. So you expect to see curly brackets and tag names and all that. Now I'm not sure if I changed any code or not, but you notice the word repository get by ID is what I create here. So forgive me if I've changed any of the type of access to the repository. So what I did at the beginning is I created a products DAO repository, a constructor for the controller, and then just said repository is a new product DAO. So I may or may not have that in your example in the previous tutorial, but it looks pretty small, less lines of code when you have one repository item, and then you can reference it all the way through on the rest of the actions. So this is what we're after here, is the one that says show one product, JSON, and then make sure the return type is JSON, and then let's go test it out. So to be able to test this out, I'm going to have some kind of a JavaScript action so we can see it. So let's go into the JavaScript site file, and I'm going to delete whatever comments are there and replace it with a new set of instructions. So the first thing is we need to make sure that everything's ready and loaded. So we'll do the $ parentheses, and inside there we'll put a function. Then just to make sure that it's running, I'm going to console log it to say document ready. Now I want to set up a click listener on all of the buttons that are in the card. And so we'll say document.on. So we're not going to refer to click right away yet because sometimes these pages will be replacing pieces dynamically. And so we learned in a previous tutorial that the click method works only if the item is originally loaded on the page. So we're looking for click, and then the class name of anything that's clicked is called edit product button. Now I'm not sure if I've actually defined edit product button, so we may have to go back and add that to our code. But if we click on one of those guys, we're going to have a function run, and so right now I'm just going to say a console message to let us know that the function was actually triggered and that the click was registered. And we're going to print out the message plus whatever the value of the button was. So I know we did create a value for the button, and so we can just say this is the object that was clicked and get its value. So let's make sure that we've got this class called edit product button. So I'm going to not do any typos, so I'm going to copy this, and let's go back into the product card. So this here is a class of button and button primary, and just because it doesn't exist yet, I'm going to paste in this new class called edit product button. So that way the JavaScript will recognize which item was clicked. There's probably more elegant ways to do this, but this is the simplest, is to provide the class name and reference it in your JavaScript. So let's run it and see if we get any messages in the console. So I've got the application up and running, and I've searched for the word soup, and so it looks like we have lots of soup. Now I want to see the console, so I will inspect the area and choose the console tab, and it's good that I see document ready. That means the first script ran. Now if I click the modal edit for any one of these, I should get a message that says you just clicked button 63 in this case, and you can see the modal now shows all 4 of the data entry items. We don't have the labels here. We need to go fix those, but I think we're doing pretty well as far as the action in the JavaScript. Let's click a different one. Let's see what this soup is. This was number 55. So the buttons seem to have a value that is being read by my script. Okay, now that I noticed that these labels are all missing, let's go and fix those now, and then we'll get back to programming the JavaScript. So let's go back into the index page where the modal is, and the label right now says it's got no content in it. Before, it was pulling the label from the actual properties of the object that was linked to it. And remember, we're not binding anything like we normally do, so we need to manually put this in here. So the first label is ID. The second one is for the name, so we'll type in the word name. The third one is for price, and the last one is for description. Okay, so next time we run this, we should see those labels appear. Let's not run it now, but just hopefully we'll see it when we get the next update. Okay, let's get back to our task. As you remember, we made something in the controller where it was called get something with JSON format. So I want to see if we can use this now in the JavaScript. So let's go to site.js, and we're going to start adding another item here in the Ajax function. Okay, so now let's go and get some of this values that came from this controller action. So the first thing I'm going to do is store an item called product ID. And that's just simpler to understand than whatever this.val is. So this is kind of an optional setting, but it makes the code more readable. Then we're going to run an Ajax setting or an Ajax function. And Ajax, as you remember, is a JavaScript way to talk to a server. So the information we're getting is coming from the action that we just created in the controller. So the type of data that we're going to get and receive is JSON. Now the data I want to provide is a JSON object. And so the ID number is the thing that the controller action is expecting. And so we have product ID as a value. Then the URL tells us to go to the show1product JSON function. And so I just wanted to make sure that I spelled this right, so I'm going to copy and paste directly from the controller action. And so paste it in here. Then after we put in the URL, we're going to have a function called success, which is the callback to know when the value is returned to us. We're going to have this thing called data. And for right now, we're just going to log the data to the console so we can see if the function is indeed doing what it's supposed to. It's supposed to return the whole set of values that are returned in a product if we know the product ID number. So let's see if this works. So I've got the application running, and this time I'm searching for peaches. Let's go ahead and check the console. So we'll inspect the page, show the console, and watch the messages as they occur here. So let's try dried peach for an example. I'm going to click the modal edit, and we have the modal title and the labels now. That's good. And then what I'm really interested to know is what came back in the console. So you can see that it told me I clicked item 216, and then it told me that it went to the controller and fetched item 216 and returned it in the JSON format. And sure enough, as you look at this, it is definitely JSON. You can see ID 216, the name is dried peach, and the rest of it. So I have this data. The next goal is to then fill in the form. So the 216 should fill up and right here automatically for me, and then I can go ahead and edit this if I wish. And I can either choose close or save changes. So that's the next step, is to fill the form in so the user can edit the data if he wants to. Alright, so now the next goal is to fill in the form. So I want to fill in all of the input fields with the data that is in this section called data. Now how am I going to get to those? Let's go take a look at the modal. And so I go back to index, and so I want to give this line here the value of the current object that's been selected. Well, you can see that it has an ID number called modal input ID. The next one is an ID of modal input name. So we're going to need that now. So let's just copy this so I don't spell it wrong. And let's go back into the code where the JavaScript is found. And I'm going to put in the ID number, so that's a pound sign, of the modal input ID. Now I want to set its value to something. So you can just put in the word val, and then whatever you put in parentheses will be automatically assigned to that. Well, what is the val? So it is data dot, and then we have the capital ID, I believe, as its name. So the first thing should be filled in. Okay, so let's continue on with the rest of the input fields. So I'm going to have the modal input name as the next item. And so we will insert it into the value of the form here. So it'll be data.name as the contents. Then the next one is modal input price. And of course, we're going to use the data.price value again to insert it. And then we'll do the last one the same way. So when we have all four of these items inserted into the values inserted into them, we should see a form that is filled out for us. So we've got ID, name, price, and description. Let's see if that actually shows up when I run the form. So I've got the application up and running and the console visible, and I'm searched for peaches. So if I were to choose the modal edit, I should see these filled in, but they are not. So I have a typo somewhere in the instructions. Can you figure out where it is? You can see the contents, what's supposed to be filled in here says ID, name, price, description. So that's the data. And over here in the code, you can see that I have the same items. I have data ID, data name, price, and description. But I put these as capital letters, and they came back as lowercase letters. So it is type sensitive. If I were to just choose the edit button, you can see that the edit form is filled in correctly. However, when I do the modal button, I've got blanks. So let's go back here. I don't have to stop the browser. I can edit JavaScript code and then refresh the page, and it still works fine. So I'm going to change all these from a capital I to a lowercase I. Same for the N, the P, and the D. Okay, so they're all changed. I'm going to press the Control S for save, switch to the browser, and refresh. And now when I try the modal edit, I get the information that I was looking for. So you can see all of the data. So I can't change any, well, I can change it, but it doesn't take any effect. So if I put in dried peach 2, for example, and choose save changes, nothing is updated. But at least I've got the modal to display correctly. So let's go and now record those changes and put them in the database. All right, so now let's go ahead and code some click events for the save button. So at the bottom of the JavaScript, let's go and put in a new click listener. So save button is the ID value of the save button, the save changes button. So we need a function. Now the goal of this function is to collect all of the values that were in the input field and then generate a new product object in JSON format. And eventually we'll send that back to the controller to be saved in the database. So first of all, let's define the product and all of its properties. So we'll have a product with a property of ID. And we're going to get that value from the data input form. So we use the modal input ID as the ID number. And then I just want to get the value of that input form. So the value is the contents of the text field, the input field. Now the others are very similar. So name comes from the modal input name ID, and we get the value as well. And then we have price and description. So price, description are the last two, and when we get done we have all four. So the product is going to be a JSON object with all four of these values assigned. Then we want to log it out so that way we can see if it actually was created correctly. So let's put in a message that says it was saved, and then we will log the product object. And so the product object should look a lot like what we put into it at the beginning. So let's check it out and see if it works. So I got the application running. We've got soup on the screen this time, and I have a document ready message in the console log. Ready to go. Let's go ahead and click the modal edit, and you can see that the item was populated correctly. So item 63, soup, Campbell's veggie chili. So I'm going to make one change here. I'm going to change it from $1.37 in my case to $21.37, and let's choose Save Changes. Now what I'm looking for is the console log to update the values. So 2137 should be different from its previous. I'm also going to put in here something in the text here. I'm going to say very good Campbell's Veg Chili. So we have a name change and a price change. So let's see if it works. Save changes, and what do we have? So it recorded as very good Campbell's, and the price is $21.37. So it created the object. It didn't update. We haven't gotten to the update on the display yet, but we're at the step that's getting closer. So we can take this object that has been created in JavaScript, send it to the controller, save it in the database. That's the next link in the chain. So let's make a controller action to receive this data. So let's go switch to the controller for the products. And I'm looking for an action that's already similar to what I'm trying to do. So we have a process edit control, or an edit action. And so we're going to copy and paste that. Now I'm going to call this thing process edit and return partial. So that is a little more descriptive. So I'm expecting a product model, and then I'm going to update it in the repository. So that actually triggers the database update. Now when I return this thing, I'm going to return not the entire index, but just one card. So the return type, or the return value, is product card. That's the view that I'm trying to generate. And I also have to tell it that this is not the entire view, it's just a partial view. So I'll change the view type. And then the data that I'm sending to that partial view is not the entire list, it's just one item. And I already have this thing called product that was passed in through a parameter. So I'll just send that back to the partial view. So this should return a card. Now I need to go and catch that in JavaScript and then do something with it. So now in the JavaScript again, let's add a new function here. We're going to use Ajax. And the purpose is to save the updated product and then use the controller to do that for us. So we're going to put it in the database. So we've got this product item, and now we need to send it. So let's put it into JSON format. And then the data that we send to this method or this action is called product. That's what it's expecting to receive. That's its input. The URL is process edit return partial. And so I'm going to copy and paste that directly from the controller so I don't misspell it. And then the success function, we're just going to return the data, or console log the data, so we can see if the data comes back correctly. Now the data I'm expecting is a card. It's going to have a bunch of HTML tags in it, and then we can eventually put that on the page. But for right now, I'm just going to console log it to see if the data looks like it's supposed to. And then we'll take the next step after that. So let's test it out and see what kind of data comes back from this Ajax request. So here's the test. I've dialed up peaches on my search, and I've opened up the console. So let's go with the dried peach area and choose the modal edit. So we can see dried peaches indeed here. I'm going to change the price. 65 seems pretty expensive to me, so let's lower the price to $5.79. For dried peach, I'm going to put in here dried tasty peaches. Now I'm going to go and save this. I'm looking at the console log to see if anything comes back with errors. Let's choose save. And it says here that the dried tasty peach was put in, and then you can see it took a second, but we got a whole bunch of HTML code. So this code here is the partial view for a card. And let's look through the details to see if this would actually work. So if you look at the name, you see dried tasty peach does show up. If you look at the next line down, you see the next item has $5.75 for the price. So it appears that the partial page update would work. However, we have not applied it. So the original is still here. What happens if I refresh the page? So that's going to go back to the database and find all of the data that's in there. And you can see dried tasty peach shows up, and the price is now $5.79. So it appears that the update in the database took effect. It just did not update this one slice of the page that I wanted to. That's the entire goal of this process. So we are one step away from the partial page update. So let's go and fix that in the JavaScript code now, and then I think we're almost done. So we're going to take some segment of the page and replace its HTML contents with the data that I just returned back, all of that nice JavaScript partial page update. Now, the only thing I have to do is figure out which item on the page needs to be targeted. what square is the content that we want to replace. So let's go back and find something that we typed a while ago. So in the index page, there was a div that we put in called card number. So this section here, card number with the item ID, should be the card that we try to fix or try to replace. So card number hyphen number. Okay, so let's go and use that. So inside of the selector area, I'm going to put in here card hyphen number and then a hyphen. And now I need the product number or the card number. So do I have that? Yes, I do. So I can put in a plus sign, and the product itself has a ID number. So we'll put in product.id as the last piece. So card number 1, card number 5, or 63, or whatever, is going to take its HTML contents and replace the data, or replace it with the variable called data. So I think that should work. I'm going to save this, go back to my page, refresh it so the JavaScript takes effect. And now here's the final test. So let's go back and try my dried tasty peaches again. And let's raise the price to 15 again. And I'm just going to change it back to dried peach. And let's go ahead and save the changes. So we have dried tasty peach here. So it didn't quite take effect. That's very disappointing. I'm going to inspect the page here, and let's go ahead and use the selector button and try the card idea. Let's go and see what's going on. So we've got card number, and then we've got two items here. We've got 216, and it looks like there's a space in there. Well, isn't that inconvenient? Because this is certainly almost what I'm after. So card number space 216. I've got to fix that. So I did something wrong when I created the ID value for each card. So let's look back at the index page and see if we can fix this. So I do have I have the quotation marks and then the ID number outside of it. So I believe if I just cut that and include this inside of the quotation marks, it'll all become now one string. So that might work. Let's see if that works better. All right, I've got the application running again. Let's go ahead and inspect the page. And I'm going to look at the elements to make sure that these will actually work. So I've got card number 216, as you can see right here. This looks like it's all one piece of text now. That's probably going to work better. So we got dried peaches. Let's go ahead and modify that one. And instead of dried peaches, let's go with let's change the name to Very Dried Peach, and let's change the price to $3.79, and let's save the changes. And you can see Very Dried Peach shows up, and it looks to me like the page picture was redefined as well. So I don't know what that has to do with peaches, but it certainly is a different update. So that seems to work. So we got Snapple Tea. Let's try that one. I'm going to take out the word tea and just put in Save Changes. It updates this box, hopefully. And it will replace the, apparently it doesn't need to replace the picture at all. Now I want to make another visual effect that will be more obvious to the user. So in the JavaScript code, I'm going to add or chain on another function, which is hide. So it'll make the box disappear, and then fade in is the visual effect. And if I put in some milliseconds behind it, it will slow it down. So 2000 milliseconds is 2-second fade in. Let's see if that makes any difference. So I'm going to switch back to the browser, refresh the page, and try to make another update. So let's go to the modal edit for the Snapple Peach, and I'm going to just put in here the word tea peach, and let's update the price to $184 and save it. So the box should disappear, and it should reappear in 2 seconds. So that seems to be doing its job. Let's pick another one and test it out. This is fun now. So we got peach nectar, and let's just change it to peach juice, and I'm going to lower the price to 25 cents and save it. Now let's see if the effect works. Sure enough, it shows as peach juice and it's 25 cents, and the effect is there. So we've got ourselves an entirely functional application using partial page updates and a lot of JavaScript code to go with that. So you could extend this now. You can see that we're doing partial page updates. You could have all of your actions now in JavaScript code, and then you don't have to do any page refreshes at all. You are pushing yourself towards what's called a single page application, or an SPA. And it relies on controllers that know how to talk in JavaScript code, as you can see, and can produce some kind of a data that can be replaced on the screen. So in one sense, this looks new to you, but it's actually kind of old technology. jQuery and partial page updates had their day. They had their thing in maybe the 2010s area. And then the more modern frameworks that do this are React and Angular and Vue, and they use the exact same techniques, but they are a little bit more sophisticated, and the JavaScript frameworks do a lot of the work for you. But this is a great way to introduce yourself to this partial page update, single page application idea. And for my purpose, for my understanding, I understand React and the others much better after doing a little bit lower level jQuery application like the one you see here. But in total, you've learned quite a bit here in building this application. So we've come to the end of our products app. It's partially page update, and I hope to see you in the next video, where we're going to go on and do some more things with C# and a little bit more enterprise as far as the design of how an application should run. So we'll see you in the next video.